Welcome to Milwaukee, a burning house. Dr. Martin Luther King said in his last conversation with Harry Belafonte that he feared that he was integrating his people into a burning house. Well, Milwaukee is a house that's on fire. How do you know that Milwaukee's on fire? Look at what took place over the summer. What's producing the fire? It's what's inside the hearts and minds of the youth and the people in this city and in this country that's suffering. Now, the people are sick and tired of injustice and American hypocrisy. Injustice breeds imbalance. You see those little Palestinian children overseas who throw rocks at tanks, who strap bombs to themselves and blow everybody up? No religion made them do that. It's injustice. Injustice breeds imbalance. Now what you see afar will soon come to your doors if you do not act and do something about the injustice. Now let me paint a picture for you. Show you something. See this tennis ball here? If I take this tennis ball and I drop it from a low point, it bounces but only so high. If I take this same tennis ball and I drop it from a high point, it bounces higher. That's to say that the greater the fall, the greater the capacity to rise. Those in the hood have suffered a great and mighty fall for a long, long time. They have a great destiny awaiting them, and that destiny is to rise. So like the Bible teaches, those who were sold in the land as slaves shall become the masters of it. Now, you can help in the rise and help put out the fire, or you can stand by and do nothing, or be envious of those who are destined to rise. But I guarantee the latter two will produce a puff of smoke in your country. Now, the way we see it is that separation is the only and best solution if we cannot get freedom, justice, and equality under this system.
I'm from these streets, I'm from these schools, and much like these youth, I've broken their rules. I cussed out my teachers and busted their windows, was a jerk to my elders and disrespected my kinfolk. Shoulder shrugs and mean mugs were frequent responses, got plenty referrals. Smoke weed in the bathrooms and the hallways, always into something you couldn't tell me nothing. I was ripping and running, playing by my own rules, and to tell the truth, I see a lot of me in these young dudes, and just like me, they realize that we've been duped, hoodwinked, bamboozled, left to our own devices, and the education we get in is priceless. I mean, worthless. I mean, what's some worksheets and a word find to a broken heart and a lost mind? And if we ever want to climb out of this current situation, we're going to need some better tools and better information, because right now, we're the owners of the worst test scores in the nation, highest rates of black male incarceration, worst place to raise a black boy in the nation, and of course, that don't tell the whole story. But either way, the prognosis is grim. So many say, blame it on the parents, it's them, and blame it on the teachers, it's them, and yeah, I guess we can do that. So many of the ones that I see have a real hard time relating to our teens. Most of them understand these youth live with broken dreams. Some so tattered that they don't want to dream no more. And if you want to get in, you got to be savvy enough or bold enough to come through a locked door. And I know, because I do it on a daily basis. These kids nowadays have a valid distrust for the system, and the promise to be in school is a means to make it. And to some, living seems harder than dying, and giving up seems more worth it than trying, but they got lion hearts if you want to test their principles of what they believe in. But it's sad, because most of what they think they know was really just meant to deceive them. And if you really want to know the reason, peel back the layers of history and you will see that ain't no way this condition just came about. Nah, you can trace it back to that transatlantic route and all the bullshit between then and now, so I don't know what all the panic's about. They just act like they care, but really that's just the cover. Take a look at all my native sisters and brothers, fully disenfranchised, but they got y'all thinking they got that casino bread stacked to the sky. That's just another lie. And that's another paragraph, because right now my people need math. See, educating the youth is my passion, but I can't do it in the confines of the four walls of their classrooms because it lacks room for growth because of that bureaucratic chokehold. I'm still into that uncut, don't hold no punches, move outside of the guidelines and blow minds. Yeah. I'm from these schools and I made it to be a master defying their rules. I'm a poor righteous teacher trying to make it so simple, and to come from where I came from to get where I'm at now lets me know that there's hope. To come from where I came from to get where I'm at now lets me know that there's hope. I see hope.
Hope.
See, nowadays, we're in a vast arrangement. People know what's wrong, but can't change it. They threw us in the abyss, which is why we're here on this day to say this. They start our children in prison cells, codenamed elementary, with riddled and prescription shells full of shame and sympathy. Then comes in religious spells to fully gain consistency. Your plant appears of sin and hell with infidels for distancing. Make you blind to how they really see. Never for a profit, yet they sell divine and silly dreams. Love is their deposit, but they damn to hell to kill the springs. Believe in my beliefs before you die in private iller scenes. So this is what we're here to say.
I'm tired of all these casual casualties. Tell the world that black lives matter like gravity. We intergalactic. We black magic gang talking rapping and the hat tricking. We suffer all melanin like Tempur-Pedic mattresses, while consistently selling our people to the masses, till our culture distracted. We're going backwards. We're going backwards. We're going backwards, I'm not amused. They shout all lives matter for subterfuge, attempting to turn our purpose confused. They still deny racism, even with the camera crew. Recruit us in the pudding that we about to serve addition to. Just a set of black teens, the prison is acting residual. Our complexion automatically make us a criminal. They don't ever get critical. Why every time an innocent black male gets murdered by the police racist people who quick to say, what about a black on black crime? You just want your president's thinking just to be justified. Giving us a violent image so that you can be quote unquote terrified and give more excuses to take our lives. This isn't okay. So what you see is what you get, like a buffet. And they don't want us to vote or demonstrate. Voter ID laws being created to disenfranchise minorities, so we won't have a say. That's our beautiful black queens and kings, and they blocking our path and make the way. And this is American problem. So everyone has come together and make a change.
A high national jail rate before we even get a social security number. 1 out of 4 females are sexually abused, raped, or harassed before the age of 18. Their purity is stolen from them before the age of 18. They walk around this world with no one understanding them. And then they come to school and they don't understand the work, and you wonder why they drop out. No one understands them. My solution to this is try to understand the kids. Try to talk to them. Try to touch them on a more personal level. You touch them on a more personal level, and you get them to understand, you'll give them purpose. Instead of looking at it as a job, look at it as something that changes someone's life and give them purpose. You give them purpose.
Everyone's afraid.
Thomas Jefferson said that he trembled when he reflected on the fact that God's justice would not sleep forever. Where do we go from here? This is our call to action. We're asking that 3 out of every 5 of you do something. Do something to help the rise of those in the hood. Why do we say 3 out of 5? Because we know everybody's not going home. We know that. And those of you who sit and say, well, it wasn't me, I didn't have anything to do with it, I didn't have anything to do with slavery. The Bible says, prepare the children for slaughter, for the iniquities of their fathers. So the sins of the fathers will be visited upon the heads of the children if you don't beat that prophecy. So this again is our call to action. Do something to help those who are destined to rise. Do something. Because if you don't, your country will go up in a puff of smoke, and you won't be able to say you were not warned.
Yep.
Good morning, Imagining America. I hope those young people and educators connected to the urban nonprofit True School are not going far. I see them in the corner. We need to give them a round of applause. James Suflowski, Rare Tactic, I know he's still here, all right, Rare. Joshua Jenkins, Charisma Carsen, and Jaylin Ramel. Their performance emerged out of a true school process facilitated by Fidel Verdin and Ahmad Muhammad. I think Fidel is here as well. Let's give Fidel. So our theme for this conference is At the Crossroads. While we're at the crossroads, we can take a moment to reflect. We can take a moment to look forward, take a moment to think about the choices we face. Then we got to make a choice. You will not be surprised to know that we believe that at the crossroads, there are not only decisions and dispositions, strategies, but there's also sounds and movement. Can you say that with me? Sounds. And movement. At the crossroads. Wait a second. Can't you hear it?
clarion call. A clarion call. to imagining America, our community, but it's inspired by our amazing staff. And we do have an amazing staff. If they are in the room, I'd like Holly to raise her hand. I know she's up there. Give y'all a hand to Holly Leon, please. He deserted us, but y'all know Kevin Bott, don't you? Kevin's up there. The inimitable Jamie Haft. I know she's there. And of course, we have Karen Boland, who holds it down all the time. I'm sure she's in the back. Heather Ryerson drove all the way across the country.
Brought my guitar here, I'm especially grateful to Heather.
And you know my heart is full because those two dancers moved me in a powerful way. Remember we said not only sound, but movement is at the Crossroads. And we were so honored to have the excellent skill of Rissi Zimmerman. Please stand, Rissi. From the University of Southern California, I mentioned George Sanchez is right in front. George puts it together. Y'all know about George, right? Yeah. And then my baby girl, Jasmin Afrikali Eatman. Where are you? Great. So, Sounds at the Crossroads. We know that this is our outgoing conference as directors, and we thought we'd just show up here in a different way to celebrate this transition with you. Some don't know that Scott actually was going to be a full-time musician. Isn't that right? I was for a while. Produced 2 albums. 3.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah. So we wanted to share a little taste of our arts with you. And so we know this presentation has taken up most of our allotted speaking time, but we hope that this message, these 2 words, freedom and humanity, ring powerfully for you. We're going to have something more to say in a forthcoming work, which we'll mention in a minute.
We wanted to take this moment to acknowledge and thank and celebrate the women who came before us. We were about to hand off the baton to somebody new in this next summer. And of course, the first, our founding mother, Julie Ellison, who couldn't be with us here today, but which we all need to give a round of applause.
And Julie amazed us with her leadership with respect to the humanities. But Dr. Jan Cohen Cruz actually wrote the book on community engaged theater. Let's hear it for Jan.
So we discovered at a bar in New York City that we have the same birthday. And I always have to say, it's not the same year, it's the same month. I'm sure you can tell which one it is, because this guy's got family. I'm just trying to keep up with it. But both of us bring to our work a deeply grounded sense of self from our families. So we thought we would give you a glimpse of that. It's a photo of my parents. This was taken in January of 1945 in California, in the Bay Area. My father was in the Army Air Corps. He was stationed in California. He thought he was going to be shipped to the European front. And the war ended before that could happen. They got rushed to get married in California so that they could do that before he was sent off. Lived a very solid working class life. I'm deeply grounded in their stories.
And I'm so delighted that the technology enables us to put side by side Scott's parents and my parents. My dad is actually in the room. important sense of understanding who we are and what our identity is. And anyone who knows us knows that we bring that to our work. That's an important piece of our work.
So we're not leaving Imagining America after this conference. We have set up for ourselves a whole set of projects that are going to take us a long time to get through. We've been talking and thinking a lot the past 4 years, just over 4 years with our fabulous staff about what Imagining America is about. And what we've really come to is what it's about is the work of Imagining. So we just made a little challenge for ourselves. We have a little fake book cover of the book that we're going to We got the cover. We got the title and we got the cover. All we need is But we look forward to filling that book with stories from across the country. Because when we talk about the work of Imagining as the work of Imagining America, we ask ourselves, where have we seen that work? Where have we seen that work? We've seen it in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Yeah, which one?
Yeah. We've seen it in Northern California. With the Central Valley and UC Davis, we have a team. We've seen it in Alabama. I mean, we've seen it in Georgia. We've seen it in Florida.
Gainesville, Georgia.
We've seen it in Chicago. Minneapolis.
We've seen it in Iowa, right? Baltimore. Where else have we seen it?
Baltimore.
Where? Chester, that's right.
There's our Baltimore people right there.
There is ever so much freedom that is revealed through knowledge.
But the most powerful channel is recognizing our shared humanity. I think we need to say that again. There is ever so much freedom that is revealed through knowledge.
But the most powerful channel is recognizing our shared humanity. So many people think we will do that at the various plenaries throughout, but we wanted to use this time to show up in this way, and now we're going to hand it over to Rob Smith, who has done a tremendous job in bringing us to this place as the lead organizer for this conference. Let's give Rob.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be very, very brief because we've got a dynamite panel discussion that we've got to get to. We've got some awesome activities planned early on here, starting at 11 o'clock. Thank you for your attendance. We welcome you, of course. And I want to say on behalf of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Marquette University, the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design, all of my awesome colleagues and friends, and all of these wonderful grassroots leaders who made this possible, to say to them, thank you from the depths of my heart for making this a truly embedded experience. What you're going to do over the next couple of days is you're going to be out and about taking part in these conversations in the spaces and in the communities where the action is happening. Because it's very important that we honor our community voices and bring these conversations to them instead of always bringing them to a campus or a hotel. I'll ask our panelists to start making their way up front here so we can keep this moving. Indeed, we are at a crossroads. We know it because of the political gridlock that our nation is witnessing. We know it because of all the violence that we're seeing, particularly state violence. We know that we are at a crossroads because most of us are a little concerned even when we turn on our faucets to get a drink of water. Right? And there is no other arena where this crossroads is needed for us to be given significant consideration in the arena of public education. Again, welcome to Imagining America 2016. Thank you all. I would name folks, but you know if I forget somebody, I have to hear about it. So, thank you all. All of the scores of people that made this possible. Thank you very, very much. Let's have a wonderful, wonderful conference experience, and I'll turn it over to Ruth Coniff right now. Thank you all very much.
Thank you to Jasmin, who's sitting in the front row here, and thank you to Imagining America for asking me to be here. I'm Ruth Coniff. I am the editor-in-chief of the Progressive magazine. We're a national progressive political magazine. We've been around for 109 years, based here in Wisconsin. And in the last couple of years, we've made it a big focus to talk about what's happening in public education. And it's very clear to all of us here in this room and to anybody who's paying attention, I think, certainly in the state of Wisconsin, that the attack on public schools is one of the biggest, most important issues that we face as a country and as a democracy right now. So we've been talking about that for a couple of years, and as I walked in the door this morning, I bumped into one of our education fellows at the Progressive, Ashana Bigard from New Orleans, who's out there somewhere. Ashana is one of 12 people around the country who write regularly for the Progressive's website about the challenges facing public education and what's going on in every region of the country. And she's just produced a series of videos out of New Orleans using youth actors to talk about the particular things that are happening in New Orleans and why selling that to places like Milwaukee is a truly disastrous idea. So really looking forward to releasing those in the next week. I want to welcome our amazing panel. I'm really honored to be here up here with these folks. Larry Miller, the editor of Rethinking Schools, and Milwaukee school board member, has been fighting the fight to defend public education and to have a broader, more beautiful vision of what public education means for many years. Vajra Watson, who I recently met, who came here from California, is the Director of Research and Policy, founder and director of the Sacramento Area Youth Speaks group at UC Davis. And Reggie Jackson is the board chairman of America's Black Holocaust Museum and a special education teacher here in Milwaukee. And our charge this morning is to talk to you about what's going on in public education and how we make the rest of the world, the rest of the public pay attention. And I will just say on the topic of the challenge facing public education and public awareness of it, there's a lot going on in the last few years. There's a massive opt-out movement across the country. There's a recent resolution by the National NAACP to oppose a moratorium on charter schools, which is a very big deal. There were some huge protests by the Alliance for Justice, a coalition of social justice groups outside the first presidential debate to draw attention to what's going on in public education and to raise awareness of that issue. So this is happening. We're on the cusp of a big movement. So I think what we'll do on our panel today is we'll divide it into 3 parts. I'm going to ask the panelists a series of questions, and the way that the conversation is going to go is that we'll talk for about 30 minutes, and then we'll invite you to come up and ask questions and engage in a dialogue as well. If you want to begin by laying out the problem, I'm going to ask each panelist to talk about their work, their vision, and a recent challenge that they're confronting that they really, if they boiled it down, see as sort of the essence of the challenge that we face in this work. Then we're going to talk about sort of how we wrestle with that, and we're going to close by talking about a positive vision for the future and where we're going from here. So I'm going to begin with Larry Miller, and I would just like to ask you to describe what the work is that you're doing currently and what's a recent challenge that you're confronting that fits into this project.
Sure, thank you, and thanks for this opportunity. I was a high school teacher for 17 years and aging, and decided that I wasn't happy with what I saw in Milwaukee, so I retired from Milwaukee Public Schools as a teacher and ran for the school board. So be careful what you ask for. Now I'm responsible for 77,000 students, $1.1 billion, and 10,000 staff. And our charge is to educate each and every student. We have 20% students classified as special ed. They have an IEP. We have declining funding. We are constantly under attack from a legislature that's, both houses are Republican and the governor is Republican. And it started before Walker became governor, but it reached a height with the Wisconsin uprising that you saw in response to all of the attacks that were going on, and teachers were considered the main target of a lot of those attacks. So what I feel
I'm facing is public education is under attack. We have 26,000 vouchers in the city of Milwaukee. There are 77,000 students in Milwaukee public schools, and there are 26,000 students receiving vouchers going to private schools. So it shows you the formidable attack on public that's going on here. My call is to educate every child that walks through our door. And what that means is, first of all, they have to be protected. And that means protecting their culture, protecting their intelligence, and protecting their community, okay? And from that flows the task of creating communities of learning that really do meet the needs of every single child. This is not what I see going on universally, but this is our charge. So I just want to start with.
Okay. When we were talking on the phone before this panel, we were talking about sort of how to attack this, and Vajra Watson said something that I thought was really interesting, which is, if the youth aren't initiated into the village, they'll burn it down. So I thought maybe you could elaborate a little bit on what you meant by that and talk about your work and the challenges that you're looking at.
Definitely. So just the African proverb, if the youth are not initiated into the village, they will burn it down to feel its warmth. And I think when we look across the world, but also just across this country, in terms of the outrage and the trauma and the truth-telling and soul-stirring wisdom of the youth, and the ways that young people that we even just saw this morning are making sense of the world and the world that they inherit. So in my own work, I really try to challenge the purpose of school and mobilize young people in that process. Out of UC Davis and in California, we do a lot with spoken word performance poetry as a stepping stone to that process, bringing community-based educators and artists into these classroom spaces. But we remain really cognizant that school systems and the purpose of school is really steeped in legacies of colonialism, and that a shaming process has happened over and over again for many low-income youth of color, that they have to leave who they are outside the door. And even then at the university, as like a first-generation student to college, I felt that same way, that I had to somehow leave who I was in order to excel academically. So in the process of transforming space, in the process of reclaiming and redefining our humanity, the way we show up present impacts the way we do our work. And as just a final little piece, I'm really inspired by Steve Biko, who said, and asked really, what is the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor? The minds of the oppressed. So that education as a tool of liberation really has to ground the work we do in reconceptualizing the pathways that we make through elementary, middle, high school, and to and through college. So I'm really honored to be here with you this morning.
Thank you. Reggie Jackson, you're the board chairman of America's Black Holocaust Museum. You work with kids in special ed here in Milwaukee. Tell us how you bring those things together and what you see as the biggest challenge that you confront right now.
Well, one of the most amazing things about being a teacher is that students say things that make you wonder why you're doing what you're doing. Just last week, I was in one of the 7th grade classes, a math classroom, walking around assisting the special ed students that I work with, and one of the regular ed students said this to me, "Mr. Jackson, why are you working here?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You're too smart to be working here." And I said, "Well, thank you." But it made me wonder, was she saying that smart people shouldn't be teachers, or that something was wrong with a smart person working with these children, that they don't deserve to have smart teachers? And so that kind of put me in this mindset of understanding that the work I do with America's Black Holocaust Museum since back in 2002 when I joined that organization, and the work that I do as a teacher they're together like this. And I try to engage the students that I work with. I teach 7th graders this year. Last year I taught 6th and 8th graders. And last year I taught strictly math. But I did assist my colleagues in the school teaching social studies, human growth and development classes, things of that nature, but primarily math last year. This year I'm teaching math and English language arts. And so part of what I'm trying to infuse in the students that I work with within the classrooms is an understanding that all of the things that we do within the school have to tie in some way, shape, or form with social justice. Because it doesn't do our students any good to learn all of these things that we think that are important and then send them into a world that's an unjust world that they can't understand. One of the projects I worked on last year was we have these huge bulletin boards in my school. And they required each teacher to work on a bulletin board each month. We had to decorate a bulletin board. And so the bulletin board outside of my classroom, I put together a presentation that I call All Black Lives Matter. And the reason I put that together was because the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel had done a really nice series of articles about the 152 murder victims in Milwaukee in 2015. 85% of those murder victims were black. Many of them were young people. Several of them were actually children. And so when I put this together, I found pictures of every child who had been a murder victim in Milwaukee. And one of those children was actually a student who had been a student at our school the previous year. He had left before he was murdered, but many of the people in the school knew him. Many of the students, many of the teachers knew him. And so I put it together because I was required to do the bulletin board, but I wanted to start a conversation with the students about the impact of violence within their lives. I wanted to have them have conversation with the adults in the building about this young boy, Rasheed Childs, who every time you ever saw a picture of him, he was smiling. What did they remember about Rasheed, and how did they feel when they found out that Rasheed was murdered? Because I felt that we were having conversations with the children only about academic things, but we weren't talking to them about the real world that they live in. I always tell my students that we all live in a bubble. Some of us have bigger bubbles than others, and whatever is within that bubble that you live within is the real world. It's the normal world to you. And so if you see unemployment, if you see crime, if you see homelessness within the community, within that bubble you live in, those things are normalized. If you live within a community where you hear people cursing all the time, 24 hours a day, you think that cursing is a normal way of talking. I had a student that told me that everybody curses Mr. Jackson. And when I told him that I don't really curse, unless it's necessary, they looked at me like something was wrong with me. And so I think it's important for us when we're talking about changing the way that we educate our students, we need to get more into the minds and the lives of our students, look inside of those bubbles that they live in, understanding that what's normal to us isn't necessarily normal to them. Normalcy to them is surviving in the community, the bubble that they live within. So if they have to walk around looking like a tough guy with their pants sagging to survive in that bubble that they live in, we should stop sweating them about sagging pants in the schools. Because we have to understand where they're coming from. And we have to understand that we need to stop doing this one thing. We need to stop judging other people by our standards.
Come on.
Everybody lives a different lifestyle. They live in a different bubble. What works for them within that bubble to help them survive won't necessarily be the things that we want them to do, but it works for them. Let's stop judging them and find ways to expand their bubble, to make them live in a bigger community than that small community they live in. That's what we require in education, to stop worrying about math, reading, and writing, and start talking to these kids about the real world, because that's the world that they live in outside of our building.
Can I? I'm gonna have, has a response to that, and then I'm gonna go to the next question.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think that you bring up so many critical points. I think so often in education, we try to convince young people to escape their hood. And even college becomes yet this mechanism to get out versus transform your hood. So the notion of like scholar activism that we talk about in the academy, the more you know, the more you owe. That's something that should be, you know, really infiltrated and inoculated into our other systems. And just, you know, the violence, that's something that, you know, even the violence that we're seeing nationally. Now, when I came in and I saw, they say Milwaukee is full of gangsters, but I don't see them. I see young guns who had no one to teach them on the cover of our pamphlet. Now, I could take you to Sacramento, and you'll hear the same thing, and I could take you to Vallejo, and you're going to hear the same thing, and I could take you to Oakland, and you're going to hear the same thing. So part of the process that we use to unlock the imagination of young people who are traumatized, you know, the greatest crime in this country is poverty. We're institutionally traumatized by systems of inhumanity. But what does that healing process really look like? So, for instance, Mercy, one of the students in our program, she was with her brother when she was 5 years old. Her brother was babysitting her when he was shot and murdered. And she never talked about it, dealt with it. So when we met her, she was fighting in high school. Well, no one had taken the time to actually put those pieces together so that she could then share, just publicly share that trauma as an act of healing. And so I was really inspired by what you said, and just wanted to say that that's something that we're seeing patterns in all of these cities, that young people, they're crying out to be heard, and oftentimes the system is continuing to silence them.
So I want to move to asking you about the critique of the system and how we respond as public education advocates to that. So if we're trying to defend the idea that we should have publicly funded, high-quality schools for every child against a pretty powerful group of people who say, I acknowledge there are these problems. I acknowledge, for example, we had a poet talking about the valid distrust of the system. So tapping into that valid distrust and the ways in which schools have failed kids, and especially kids of color, and then saying the answer is corporate education reform, privatization, and a pretty stripped down, pretty tough model of what education looks like. How do we wrestle with that, the valid distrust and the different vision? And actually, I'd like to start with Larry and talk about that from a political point of view, because to me, I think this is really politically one of the biggest issues that we confront.
First of all, whatever we do in society costs money. Education costs money. The year that following the uprising in Wisconsin, the legislature took huge funding away from public schools. Between that loss and other losses, in those 2 years, Milwaukee Public Schools lost $90 million. Think of what that meant. That meant that in many of our 170 schools, we did not have, we had to eliminate a music program, we had to eliminate a librarian, we had to eliminate all the arts and Phi-Ed so that we could teach the prescribed corporate agenda, which was a scripted math and language arts. It eliminated the reason I went to school. I did not go to school to be, I hate to say this, to learn reading and math. I went to school, well, the girls probably had something to do with it, but I also went to school because of the creation of community and the culture that it meant for me in a small town in Wisconsin. What I see has to happen on a transformation basis, and we do need a transformation of public education. I defend it while at the same time I criticize it. You can't help but do that. But I will take public over private any day. And what it means, for example, we're in a process of transforming school culture, school by school, classroom by classroom. And the culture of when a child steps into your school, when they step in your classroom, is what is decisive. When I hear Reggie talk about his relationship with students, that relationship is the key to transformation. Professor Rob Smith that introduced us, him and I wrote a resolution called Black Lives Matter resolution for Milwaukee Public Schools, and the school board unanimously adopted it. And its intention was to be part of this transformation, to create ethnic studies. What happened to ethnic studies in public schools, in high schools? They don't exist. So we're in the process. We have 2 teachers that are teaching what we call Black Lives Matter curriculum in our schools, openly and publicly, that deal with the issues that Black Lives Matter has brought to America, and we're putting that in our schools, and we're already, it's only been going on for 2 weeks. We started it 2 weeks ago, and already we're seeing students wanting to get into those classes at the 2 schools where we're piloting this. But it's those types of transformational relationships, those types of transformational programs that are going to make a difference for whole districts, for whole schools, for whole classrooms.
So, Reggie, do you agree to take public over private, and do you feel like you can respond within the bubble that you're in adequately to this challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that amazes me is that we had mostly public schools throughout a majority of the nation's history. I went to public schools my entire life. My wife, her family is fortunate enough to be able to have the money to send her to private school. And I know that the education that I received in public school was great. I would not change the childhood that I had and the education I received. I would not transfer that to having the education that children nowadays are having for any reason. There's not enough money on the planet that you could give me that would make me take back what I got and get what students today are getting. One of the things that I see is that people seem to think that the schools today are the schools they went to. Every time I hear people challenging whether the schools are doing a good job or a bad school, whether they be public schools, private schools, whatever they may be, I always tell them, you don't know what you're talking about because you're assuming that the schools are like they used to be when you were there. They're not that way anymore. The resources aren't the same. The children certainly are definitely not even close to being the same as when we were in school. There was a fear within us that came from 2 different places. There was a fear of authority figures, whether that be adults in the building or our family members, our parents, grandparents, uncles, neighbors, whomever it may be. And the other fear was a fear of not succeeding in school. Those 2 fears are not there anymore. People who are not in the schools, who don't spend time in the schools on a daily basis, assume that the students behave and sit in class and are engaged because they have wonderful teachers and wonderful lessons. I can tell you that's not the case. Our kids are bored to death. They're the technology generation, but we don't use technology in the classrooms. We tell the kids, put your phone in your locker, instead of telling them, pull out your phone so we can use it during this lesson. These kids, I have a colleague who has a little granddaughter who's 2 years old and is already an expert on using an iPhone. 2 years old. She can sit there for hours doing stuff on this phone. We have kids that are raised with technology, but we are anti-technology. I remember when I first started the school I'm working at now, one of the things that amazed me is when we had one of these interactive smart boards, and we were using it with a projector pointing towards it. Somebody was doing a PowerPoint. I said, we've turned the smart board into a dumb board. That's not how it's supposed to be used. When I was at Congress year-round school, we didn't have any smart boards in any of the classrooms. I'm walking past one of the closets where they stored materials. I found a smart board in that room, and I asked why was it not being used. Our technology person said, well, it doesn't work. I spent time that night pulling it out of the closet, cleaning it up, called the guy over at tech support to run a diagnosis on it to see if it worked. It worked perfectly fine. I set it up in my classroom, and I used it every single day. The students were mad at me if I didn't use it. All the other teachers got jealous because now Mr. Jackson has a smartboard. Where'd you get the smartboard, Mr. Jackson? I said, I got it from the closet with the rest of the raggedy stuff. And when I used it to engage the students to come up to the smartboard and do things so they weren't sitting down listening to me all the time. In public education, with the money that's being lost, we have to be more creative. When I teach my students about things, I have to figure out ways of making it less boring. I can use the curriculum I have and bore them to death like we've been doing for decades, or I can get them up out of their seats and stop boring them. We talk about the coordinate plane and finding points, right? You have an X value and a Y value. We teach them this in the class and they sit there with this look on their face like, what are you talking about? I went into our lunchroom and I made a giant coordinate plane on the floor with tape. I brought the students in, I gave each of them a coordinate on a piece of paper, and I said, I want you to start at the origin at 0, 0, and I want you to walk to that place. They figured it out by doing it, not by listening to me telling them how to do it on a chalkboard or a whiteboard. They learned by doing it. This is what we have to understand about these young people. They learn by doing, not by listening to us. We bore them to death. 80% of what someone says to us, we will not remember. But if we get those students up and moving around and doing things, they remember it. English language arts. I was in the 7th grade ELA class last week. We were reading a story that was written by a woman who was born in 1925. Very interesting story. The students who were having trouble reading because of the language from that time, they didn't get it. So I started to look through the book later that night and looked at each author that wrote in that book. There were 70 stories in that book. The youngest author in that book was born in 1983. 75% of the authors in that book were born between 1920 and 1940. And we wonder why the kids don't get it. They don't want to read this crap from 1930 and 1940. They don't understand it. I'm not saying the classics aren't classics. I'm saying the classics to them are not the classics that we grew up with. We have to engage them in the language that they use nowadays. Engage them in the conversations that are taking place in their communities now. Read things that are relevant to them today. They want to read about some little boy who snatched a woman's purse in 1930 because they just saw a little boy snatch a woman's purse last week. They want to read about stuff that they can understand. We're not giving them material that they are interested in reading. That's why they hate reading. I grew up reading everything from cereal boxes to encyclopedias because I was just a nerdy little boy that loved reading. Most of our kids aren't like that. We have to engage them in the world that they live in. Public education does that. Private schools can do it too. They're not going to do it any better than we do it. I've been inside of private schools. Some of them work wonderfully. Some of them are horrible. It doesn't matter where the money comes from, whether it comes from a check that the parents write or a check that the state writes. We seem to think that private schools have some magic bullet that public schools haven't figured out. They don't. The reason that their success is where it is because those parents that can afford to send their kids to private schools are usually educated themselves. The greatest measure of the success of anybody education-wise is the level of education their parents had. If you come from generations of education, you are going to value education more. Here in Milwaukee, and this is the last thing I'm going to say regarding this, we forget that this was a manufacturing city where you could drop out of high school and get a job at A.O. Smith, making great money, and never have to worry about going to college or getting an education. We grew up with generations of people that had that mindset, that never stressed education to their children. So you didn't have this generational educational focus. When those manufacturing jobs went away, and they were left with these terrible service sector jobs that replaced them, the mindset, the mentality of Milwaukee didn't change. People didn't stress education before, and now all of a sudden we want them to stress education. They didn't have it stressed to them as children. Their grandparents and great-grandparents didn't have it stressed to them. We're living in a different world. We are not adjusting as educators. The world is changing around us. Children are changing around us. We're not adjusting with them. They're riding a surfboard, and we're drowning in the ocean.
I heard that.
Well, speaking of surfboards, Vajra, I'm going to ask you to answer, and then I got to know we need to move to our Q&A after this. So I think we're just going to invite people to participate from here. But
So
please.
to your original question, I think that sometimes we get challenged by creating these binaries between public and private, and without a doubt, given that it's public all day, every day, education and schooling is a civil right in this country, and we have to fight for that, absolutely, right? But I think at the same time, a lot of these political movements remain short-sighted. Short-sighted that the notion of disaster capitalism didn't just come with the neoliberal agenda in the last 20 years. Disaster capitalism has actually been the sorting mechanism by which schools stabilize inequality in this country. So imagining America, can I imagine public education? We have yet to have it. We have yet to have an education system that is truly by the people and for the people in many ways. Why are urban schools failing nationally? We could say all these different reasons. We could also say because they are supposed to fail. And when they do not fail, they are an anomaly in this kind of larger kind of macroeconomic system that schools fit into and supplement. And just a quick example. So I've spent the last 3 years doing research in Oakland Unified School District. I was brought in to analyze and study the Office of African American Male Achievement. Oakland was the first school district in the nation in 2005 to put in their strategic plan that they would address and eliminate institutionalized racism. So as part of that study, I decided to go back and I asked the question, has Oakland ever served black families and children? Ever? What do you guys think the answer to that was?
No.
No. So in the late 1800s, when Oakland Unified School District was first formed, there was a famous professor at Stanford University. And between the late 1800s and the early 1900s, Professor Terman really brought the eugenics movement into education theory. But he needed a laboratory. Where was his laboratory? Oakland Unified School District. And so the tracking system that was put in place in the early 1900s continues. And his graduate students, Dr. Vigil, also from Stanford University, he became the head of research for Oakland Unified School District. And you see another generation of scholars using degrees in service of colonial interest. So I think that as we talk about the political framing of public education in this country, we cannot be short-sighted. We have to understand the roots, the causation, why patterns of inequality persist, why we can look nationally. We have to understand the ways that integration dismantled and destroyed the black teaching force in this country. So as we sit in faculty meetings and we're like, where are all the teachers of color? They were fired a couple generations ago. So I say that because I think the conversation gets overly simplified, and part of good research and good activism is complicating the issues and calling out BS where we see it with bravado and courage.
So we're going to move to questions. And is there a Twitter hashtag for some of the questions? It's up behind me. Okay.
It's small.
Right there. There it is. IA2016 MKE. Okay, so somebody found that and tweeted this question, which I'm going to pitch to Larry. How can rural educators and activists better connect our community struggles to those of our peers in urban centers like Milwaukee?
Well, if you look at what's going on in the state of Wisconsin, there was special funding for low-income districts, and Milwaukee received the majority of that funding. It's a set amount of money that was put aside in the state budget. Now we share that with 99 other low-income school districts out of the 422 school districts in the state of Wisconsin. So that shows you what's happening to the rise of poverty. And so one of the things that we're trying to do, we're connecting with school boards and districts around the state to create all of these different partnerships, not just to exchange students and not just to exchange teaching experience and having some conferences together, but actually to approach the legislature to demanding a turnaround on the funding that's going on, the lack of funding that's going on in the state of Wisconsin. So there's plenty of places for us to come together. If you're in a rural school district, contact me. And we will set up some relationships because we want to exchange students. I mean, our students don't get to milk cows very often in the city of Milwaukee. So we want to send students out. We want students to come here. We've had some great experiences. So there's all sorts of ways that we can go about doing that. Because we're divided in this state, we've been historically divided. When vouchers hit, it was just Milwaukee. We were ground zero for the whole country. And now we have 26,000 vouchers being issued. Now it's a statewide, it's small, but now it's a statewide program. And now all of a sudden, people around the state are saying, hey, whatever happens in Milwaukee is now going to happen to us. So there's clearly a change in attitude, and we have to unite around these things against a common enemy, because those that want to take finances away from public schooling do not have the best interests of our kids. There's just no question. They're on the other side.
Okay, do we have some more questions? Right here. There's a microphone right here, so if you would like to ask a question, step on it. Okay, we'll just project.
I have a big voice. So I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and in the state of New Mexico, over the last, since about 1999, the number of charter schools has grown extraordinarily since that time. We have 100 charter schools in our state, and we have 54 of those are in Albuquerque alone. So, sorry, I put my face.
I talked about technology earlier.
So my question is that in that time, I followed the way the charter schools developed. So in our state, a superintendent, a charter school can be its own superintendent. So the principal, if it's state chartered, they can do innovative things. They can opt out of the Common Core. They can develop their own short cycle assessments. They can do all of these innovative things. But as we've seen over time, all charter schools have turned out to be is forgoing that innovation and struggle to just go back to the status quo. And there are a few that have held out. There are a few charter schools that are very successful. One in the South Valley Academy has had a service learning program. These kids do youth participatory action, social justice projects to graduate, but they're considered a D school because the school is graded on standardized test scores, and the majority of these kids are immigrant children, first generation Spanish-speaking kids. So you have this really kind of amazing environment, potential for innovation in the charter schools, at least in our state. But what we see is them just going back to being the same thing as a public school would be, struggling in the same way a public school would struggle. And then I speak to young student teachers at the College of Ed, and was speaking to a master's degree student, and I asked her, what is your discipline, social studies? I said, well, what are your classes like? She says, well, right now I'm in a teacher education class where they're requiring us to develop lesson plans for every learning objective in the Common Core standards. And I thought, that's what teacher education has become, is just sitting there developing lesson plans around Common Core standards. So my question to you is, from the teacher education standpoint, where can we continue to build upon those innovative educators that don't care that their school is a D school, because they see the potential in their students. They see these undocumented students going to college, going to law school. They know what they're doing works, but everything that the state and federal government is telling them that it doesn't. How do we support them?
Have you been, do you feel that you can resist that pressure, and have you seen that work? I'm not going to care that my school is a D school. I'm not going to teach to the test. I'm going to make room for this better model.
We're in a place now where schools are under a tremendous amount of pressure, where the only evaluative tool are test scores. Part of the teacher evaluation system that was developed places students' test scores as part of evaluations for teachers. So as a result, what schools have done is that they place all of their emphasis on reading and math, because those are the two things that are tested that everybody talks about: your reading scores, your math scores. 3 years ago, when I taught 8th graders, our 8th grade students took 8 different standardized tests in a single school year. 8 different ones. And each time we came to taking this test, we were supposed to get them hyped up. We had pep rallies, everything to get them hyped up and ready for the test and motivated. And after a while, they weren't motivated anymore, because they were like, well, you said the last 3 tests were the most important tests ever, Mr. Jackson. How can this one be just as important? Kids are smart. They figure these things out. And so where we are now is that the Common Core standards in math and reading drive everything that happens in terms of how we evaluate schools. What we don't understand is that the scores from these different standardized tests are not necessarily reflective of where these students are. It's reflective of where they are on that particular date at that particular time. Now, they may have come to school after having a bad weekend. They may have lost a family member over the weekend, whatever. All of these different challenges they have, but that snapshot in time is what we use as a tool to gauge the entire work of the entire school. And it's not a fair way of evaluating how a school does. I have a student who's a 7th grader, and she got the lowest score in the entire school on the latest assessment in reading. The lowest score. Nobody else is even close. I sat down with her afterwards to go over her test score, and I gave her an assessment to see what her problems were with reading. And what I found out was a 7th grade student who's special education, and she has been for a number of years. She was at a pre-kindergarten reading level. I gave her a list of sight words to see which ones she knew, because I knew that she was having trouble reading because there were words that she didn't have in her vocabulary. So I looked at what are called pre-primer words. She knew almost all of those. And then there were primer words. 80% of those words she didn't know. So she's taking these standardized tests with words that she doesn't have a clue what the words are, and she's just guessing. She's making her best guess. We are telling our schools that we are judging the special ed students by the same standard as the regular ed students. We're expecting them to get the same level of proficiency on these tests, and it's just absolutely irrational to do that. We would never take a wheelchair basketball team, have them play against a regular basketball team, and expect them to win the game. But this is what we do to our special ed students, and these tools that we use to evaluate the schools, they always say, well, I've heard administrators at every school I've worked at say, well, we got to get those special ed scores up because they're dragging down the school's proficiency rate. Why are we using the same tool to evaluate the special ed students as we are the regular ed students? When we have an IEP that says this student is at a 2nd grade level in reading, we have them taking the 7th grade reading test, and then when they do horribly on it, we act as if we're surprised. We're constantly told in the schools of education, meet the kids where they are. Differentiate. We're not doing it in the real world. We're not giving these students tests that really evaluate where they really are, and we're only concerning ourselves with the scores, and that's why we're getting rid of the arts programs. That's why social studies and science is really kind of not really all that important anymore. As long as we use that tool, we're going to be in trouble.
So I want to take, I see Ashana Bigard at the microphone. I'm going to have her ask her question. I'm going to read a couple from Twitter, so we're getting down to the
So
wire.
I just wanted, first I want to shout out to my editor, who is the hardest working lady in publishing. I'm Ashana Bigard from New Orleans, Louisiana, and I agree with almost everything you said. Of course, we're the charter school capital of the world right now. We only have 5 traditional schools left. But I disagree with you on one point when you said the children have changed. The children haven't changed. We've changed. The way we treat children has changed. So my question was, as an advocate, been advocating a long time for, common sense, which of course has seemed to be lost in our systems. How do I encourage the young people I work with, because I work with a lot of youth, to value education in a place where the teachers were fired who have education, right? They see a lot of the indigenous Black population not being hired. As a Black person with education, you may not necessarily, you won't get the jobs. And if you do get them, you're gonna be paid a lot less. How do you then convince young people that college is the way to go when they see their aunt who has a master's degree in education working as a waitress? The same as their aunt who has a GED. How do you convince the powers that be? And right now trying to work on both sides to understand folks who are pro-charter, because just like someone mentioned, the charters could be doing innovative things. I can testify as a New Orleanian with 52 districts, they're not. In fact, people said they're doing the status quo. No, I wish they were doing the status quo. And a lot of the schools in New Orleans, they don't have recess. They have something called quiet lunch, where they don't even allow the children to get social development skills by talking to one another during lunch. They're actually creating antisocial behavior, which is linked to criminal behavior, which of course will keep us in Louisiana. We already are the incarceration capital of the world. It'll keep us there. So how do I talk to young people? Because everything that's going on is lacking common sense, even though I'm finding that common sense is not common. I understand that now. But how do you get them to believe that the system can even be better when it's broken on so many levels? There's so many things we could be doing to help children, families, and communities, and we're not. Yeah.
So I would just say, first and foremost, we have to keep it 100. We can't go into a school where you can feel the boredom. You can feel it, and then go into a kid's face and be like, it's fun, you need to do this worksheet. You gotta be like, I think first and foremost, we have to get a lot more honest in our conversations with young people. The second piece that we use a lot in our work, we service about 5,000 youth each year. When we get them, they have a 1.5 or below GPA. They're on a trajectory for dropping out of school. The whole thing, in and out the jail system. And one of the things that's caught on very strong with those babies is school is my hustle. And so we do a lot around the game of school, right? That it is critical. If you get an F or if you get an A, your teacher's still about to get paid, right? And we have those type of very direct conversations with them. At the same time, though, we have another piece of our pedagogy, which is to be thirsty for knowledge. That knowledge and life and education is something that we need as warrior scholars. We talk to them about being warrior scholars and scholar activists. And this is, a 12-year-old that just threw a chair at a teacher, right? These are in those moments. And what we found is that young people who were fully disengaged, have gotten to the point where like, oh, man, I'm about to bust straight A's. you know, with my goatee, my sagging pants and all that. Because one, I know the game of school, right? Someone's decoded that for me. And then second, I become thirsty in my quest for truth. That's gonna happen in school, out of school, with my family. But what I will not allow school to no longer do to me and my family is try to convince me that it's a crime to be who I am. So I'm going to show up proudly. And with that then, we also have to work with the teachers, because we can't just empower young people and set them up with educators that are afraid of them. So making sure that we empower teachers, bring the narratives and the voices of teachers more to the forefront so that the humanity of the classroom gets reconfigured.
I just want to add to what Vajra is saying. The worst enemy of good teaching is disrespecting your students. The second enemy is boredom. Either one of those going on in your classroom, you're not a good teacher. It's not the kid's fault, it's not the community's fault, it's your fault. And so that has to be transformed. That's bottom line. At the heart of what of the question that's being asked has to be, you know, the teacher has to be transformed, but there has to be curriculum. There has to be what I call liberation curriculum that really addresses the needs of surviving in our society. That means you have to learn math, okay? But you don't have to learn it in a boring way, but you do have to learn math and science, but it also has to be connected to the communities. And students have to know history. They have to know other people's history, but you have to teach them their history. The brutality of American history, the strive for democracy in American history, and the successes. When Donald Trump runs around talking about all is bad in the black community, the black community says, whoa, that's not true. That's not true. He's demeaning the progress, the demands, the fights that have gone on and been successful. We as teachers have to bring to our kids this whole reality. We have to bring community into our schools, and we have to take students out to community. You have to see that the classroom is the world. It's not these little four walls where they hide a smart board in a closet. You have to engage the students in a much broader way.
Yep, okay. Unfortunately, we are out of time. There was one last question from a person of color undergrad from a lower middle class city who went to a private school. What is my role in changing education? Does anyone want to give a quick response? And then
To that big question.
I think it's simple. As a teacher, we have to be more than just a teacher. We have to be advocates for our students. What I was talking about earlier about students being different, students nowadays challenge teachers to not bore them to death. We used to sit in Miss Johnson's class and be bored to death, but we couldn't tell them we were bored. Students nowadays will tell you that they're bored, and you have to become an educator who engages in those conversations with the students and advocate for them not sitting in class being bored, like he was just saying. That's the most important thing you can do. Advocate for those kids, not just as a teacher, but for somebody that cares about their basic humanity. Because this is a message they're sending to us, but we're not listening to it.
Well, this has been this is a great group. It's been a great conference. I love the way we started, and I think it's going to be really interesting as we carry on. But clearly we have a big core of people here who care a lot about doing the right thing for kids and who are not bored. I don't think this has been boring at all. So thanks to you all, and I think we're going to move on to our next.